The demo for my indie game has just recently released, and a thing I get asked a lot is how I go about designing levels, both graphically and how I go about designing levels to work with the game system itself. So in this video I thought I'd go through some of the levels I've made for the demo, show how I've gone about designing those, how I've done the graphics visually for them, and just chat about how I go about designing a level, and then do a speed modelling video of the new levels that I'm making for Rhell, so a little sneak peek for you, and talk about some of my design processes, how I'm going about modelling as I'm doing it, and then finally importing that into Unity and setting it up with my game and how I go about doing that sort of thing. There'll be timestamps in the description. If you think one of those sounds really boring, you can just skip to the ones that you actually want to listen to. And if you actually want to check out my game for yourself, there'll be a pinned comment in the description, or there'll be a pinned comment in the comment section where you can get the demo now on Steam for free. It's 10 hours long, you'll have some fun playing the demo, give me your money. But other than that, have fun reuploading! Or if you're just interested in watching it, just don't press anything. Bye. Taking a look firstly at the Blender files for some of the town areas, these are kind of arranged in this hierarchical system where I have all of one map area in one Blender file, because if I want to grab a model that's being used somewhere else in the town and place it somewhere else in the town, I can easily do that instead of appending things, and it keeps all of my materials nice and neat in one place. But a thing you might notice about some of these is if you've played the full area of these areas, some of the colours are a bit off. So for example, in the full version of Rhell, or in the demo, this area right here is actually a different grass colour and a different surface colour for all of the cliff sections, which is an interesting thing I like to do with Rhell. I will have a repeating texture which is stored somewhere else, and I will just reference this for any of my visuals to these areas, and then when I want to swap it out in a color scheme, I could, for example, just swap it out for a different one. So there are all these looping different textures, and then let's say I wanted to say this rocky wall, I don't want this one, I want a different one. I'll go into my file viewer and I'll find all of my cliffs and I'll select a different one. Let's say this red one, and whatever material was using the rocky cliff, which material was used this one? Oh, that was the wrong one. Oh, that was the wrong one. I'll go into my actual cliff one, and I'll swap it out for the real one, and then this will just swap out the texture for this one area, which is a real lifesaver in terms of time, because I can obviously do this in Unity as well. I can just swap the material for one with a different colour. So that's one of the techniques I like to use a lot of in Rhell, where I would just have the same area with the same texture, but the texture will be a different colour, and I can just swap these out when it is needed, and I think that adds a lot of variety to some of the areas. I do the same with all the rock surfaces, all of the grass surfaces, all of the naturey surfaces, even these background trees. I have alternate different colour versions of them, which I think is very good for just time saving, and also makes it a lot easier to model stuff, because I'm going to be honest, if there's one type of wood colour in one area and there's another type of wood colour in another area, I don't need a unique texture for those. I can just swap the colours. So I think it's very good for that, and it's also good because it keeps things consistent in the art style of the environments and the art style of the actual objects in the game. In terms of the actual environments, I very, very easily just do it all very blocky, very simply. This is just essentially just a projection of a plane onto the texture of the cliff, which I will bring up on the side. So you can see with this part, it is basically just the UVs of the cliff. It's going onto the side of the cliff, and it's just, it's a looping texture, so it can just go on and on and on and on. I could drag this, and I could move it over here, and I could just, all I would need to do is I'd take these textures, and I just move the UV to, and that would adjust with it. And it makes it very easy for modelling. It's just a simple loopable texture, which is great for these loopable surfaces, and then you might notice I add little divots into this. You can probably do a similar thing with bump mapping or normal mapping or whatever, fancy games do for their materials. But personally, and this is just me, you don't need to do this. Personally, I will always look at the models, the UVs for tiny little objects, and see if they are actually different than the normal mapping of the things, and see if there is some detailing and bumping to them. I might be the only person in the entire world who does this. That might just be me. I don't think anyone needs to worry about this, but it's something I like to do to add a bit more detail. So all I do here is, if I was to remove this, I would use Control R. Is it? Yeah, it's Control R. I do that, do a nice little loop cut into wherever I want some detailing to be. So let's say this part, I want some detailing on this crevice, and then I'm just going to move this backwards to align with sort of the divoting of where this line is right here on the model. And you can do this as much or as little as you want in your modeling. I like to just do a little bit. Don't want it to be too detailed, because I think that kind of loses some of the charm of the cartoony nature of it, but doing it enough to give off this different illusion. That's also an interesting trick I like to do with these grasses here. You'll notice some grasses in Rhell can be interacted with. They flatten down when you walk on them, but some of them, if they're in large clumps, I don't want to place all of those manually in Unity, so I will just have a big clump of them here, and these are in areas where the player might not necessarily have as much visual, be able to see the grass in front of them, so it doesn't matter if these ones are animated, so I can just place these ones in a clump. They don't need colliders or anything. Saves me time. I like to lie to myself and tell me that it's good for the game's performance, but it is mostly just there because it's easier, and I can just, obviously select all these grass planes and move them and fill out big chunks with this. And these are a very simple texture as well. They are just a grass cutout, so I'm just placing these planes and I'm just moving them over wherever there is a grass thing on this texture, and they'll just, show up normally. Super easy way to do it. If you want to do these things, I use this trick a lot in Rhell. It will just be a 2D drawing that I will then use a transparent cutout texture for and apply that to these areas. The only other thing that is of note is the collision bounds for all these areas are different than the models. If you are making a area a environment, a landscape, I think it is a good practice to make a collision box that is different than the actual geometry of the thing you are touching. For example, these little bridge pieces here, the collisions for these are actually a blocky square, while the real thing is more of this curved surface. It just is a bit cleaner for moving on. I think it's a bit easier for movement, for collision, and also if the player was to stand on these things, it has a bit more wiggle room, a bit more, forgiveness on actual mobility, and standing on it makes it a bit easier. Same with these things here too. If I was to do the collision with the actual wooden block here, it would be very difficult to stand on because it's a curved surface. Rhell could very easily slip off it, but if I just make a cube that is the same shape as that relatively, it means I have the same surface that the player can stand on, but it's also presented in a way that's believable with the geometry of the thing, but is also easier for platforming. And that's how I go about designing areas and hitboxes. Let's look at an actual cool area now. Let's look at the castle. The castle is obviously that's a changed texture that I was just doing and showing you guys. It didn't actually look like that in the real game. Don't worry about it. The castle is probably one of the more detailed areas in the town. You will note the water isn't here. The reason the water isn't here is because water is achieved in Rhell through a water shader, which I have no reason to place into Blender when modeling it. Sometimes I will maybe, if I'm feeling like I want a judge of it, I will put a plane and I'll just make it as big as the water is, and I'll put it where the water should be. And that gives me like a nice visual feedback of water is going to be here, kind of make the model in a way that makes sense with the water being here, but it kind of depends on the area. You'll note in the area I was just in, actually, the fourth one, the water here is a rainbow shape. This is because the water in this area is muddled, so it has to be a rainbow shape, or it has to be an actual, mesh shape, but it doesn't have to be the water shader itself from Rhell, because it's not handled like in the same way that the rest of the, geometry in Rhell is, the textures in Rhell is, it's handled with a shader. There's no way of really importing that to Blender, and I have no real need to, so I'll just use a placeholder rainbow texture, and then when it comes to importing to Rhell, I'll know that big big water goes here, place the water here, and I can overlap them, and that's about it really. The only other detailing is stuff like here with the rocks. There's actually a bit more detailing, like all of these chunks are different and cut out, but then I have this darker shade below to give some illusion of depth, but obviously there's no collision on this part if we go into the collision parameters, which is really overlapping with where I have my microphone stop recording button, so let's hope I don't turn you off. But you can see that there is a divot in the mesh, but there isn't a divot in the collision because enough people have had trouble walking over this bridge and I don't need to make it more complicated. So I just kind of don't really align the collision super well with the geometry. I align the collision more so with what is organic and fun to play with. The castle has this fun detailing with the moss, which is done in the same way as the grasses, where it is just a flat texture of vines. What did I call this? Did I call it? Oh, cave moss, castle moss. That's what I called it. So these are a bunch of different planes that I will kind of align to the geometry of the castle, and I will place over it. If you're smart, there's probably a better way to do this, but all I will do is I will make a plane and I will place it on the castle, and I'll rotate it until it looks fine, and I'll put a little edge loop in it, and I'll say good enough for me. And I think that's just a nice way to do texturing, because these are all loopable textures, the same with these brickworks. Some of these are segments of other loopable textures, some of these are just loopable brickworks. I don't have variants for natural stuff like moss for two reasons. One, a bit lazy, I don't want to draw that for different variants, and also I feel like if you have a loopable texture of something that's more natural like moss, like these ones here, it would be, personally I think it's a bit difficult to make it look organic and natural when it is in loopable texture, because it looks too much like a thing that's just drawn over the rock, where if you have something like this where it is actual planes placed on top of it, I personally think it looks a bit more natural, it suits, you know, the thing. It doesn't look like it is just a drawn on texture, it is an actual tangible thing in the world that looks like it is drawing and coming off the thing. If you ask me, that's what I'd say. That's my 2 cents. And then the only other thing with the castle is there is these fun little roof tiles, because I drew the roof tile texture in a really awkward way where it is overlapping like this, and my issue I have found with this is it's very difficult to make a roof look organic with this and loopable, because when one section of the roof ends, it will be on this fun little border and the tiles will just get cut off. So I've had a lot of trouble making areas in Rhell to adapt to that, and my solution has generally just been I will get a tile like this, and I will arrange it like so, and this is basically just a projection map onto my texture, and then I'll get an array function, and all this does is it's going to duplicate my object over and over and over, and I'll just do this for the roofs because it is the lazy way to do it. It's probably not great for the optimization of the models, but Rhell's pretty low poly anyway, so who cares? I think this is, you know, roof tiles are supposed to look chunky. Where am I? What am I in? I'm in a model. I'm in the boundaries. Roof tiles are supposed to look chunky, so I think for this instance, I'm fine with them just being big blocky models. For the pillars of the tower, it's a bit of a different story where I have this. I've actually used the same, you know, texture, but in this sense, I have put a seam on the back of it so it doesn't line up here. Your seam is kind of like your seam is when you're unwrapping your object. You want it to be placed flat, so you can see these towers have this sort of unwrapping with the tower here, and this is kind of like how the color of the texture is going to be placed onto the tower itself. So if I was to shuffle this around, you can see it's kind of like moving with the texture. This is just like where it aligns to with the texture of the actual thing. And the reason the back doesn't line up is because Rhell has a fixed camera angle, thankfully, so I never have to worry about these sort of models having a, you know, fully loopable texture, because it has these elements in the design that you're never going to see, which is awesome. I love designing Rhell stuff like that, because when I've done 3D stuff in the past, I have to make it all workable and clean and not gross if you rotate it 180 degrees, and it sucks. I don't like it. This is awesome because I can be really lazy with the back of objects because they're things that the player is never going to see. You can see the tower here also doesn't line up at that point. The back of the castle is just brickwork that doesn't really work with the UVs, but it's something that's never going to be seen, so I can hide my messy parts behind there. But that's about it for the actual modelling. Let's go into the speed modelling section. Hooray! Onto the speed modelling section. I'm starting out in a scene that is already, the area I'm going to be modelling for, which makes it a whole lot more easier to keep things consistent, and also I don't have to import a bunch of materials every single time I make an area. I'm starting out with a 6-sided shape, which I'd say the name of if I could remember it, but I don't. This is just because I wanted some of these areas to be a bit more unique and not just, cubic areas. And I am realizing I've messed up the UVs, so I'm just deleting some of those some of those lines, so I can unwrap this in a way to fit with what I want. I'm basically just doing a reset of the actual UVs so I can expand them and make them this tileable thing, because all of them line up left to right, top to bottom, so I can kind of just expand these and then shape them out to be the shape I want to be. And because they all line up together, I can replace any of these materials I want with any of the other materials, and it's just going to logically fit together with the new ones because all the tiles are basically the same thing. And I'm doing the same thing with the little lip that comes off this area, because I want this to also have the tile pattern and fit with everything else visually. I decided the middle one should be red because red is a pretty colour. It makes the whole area not just look samey if one of them is a different colour. That's my thinking. And then I'm just joining these back together. On this part, I'm doing a material that goes on top of this, which is a technique I really like with Rhell, which you'll see on the full version because the visual for this isn't in Blender. But all you need to know for now, this is basically the light that's going to come off this, giving the impression this lip leads to an exit this area. Because all of these carrot areas kind of have the visual floating in space, if I have this light sort of beam coming over the top of it, I think it really gives the impression of this being a different spot, that you're going to. It's not just going forever to the thing. Anyway, I'm doing walls now. I've been talking about the lip for too long. On this part, I am raising up the walls and making those just the wall texture. The wall texture for this area is so easy to work with because it is not uniform. It doesn't have to be, vertical. It doesn't have to be properly vertical. It doesn't have to be, line up. Whatever, I'm doing lights now. I'll get back to the wall later. The lights are so easy to do. Again, just a very, very long tileable texture. But what I'm wanting to do here is I'm wanting to kind of shift the UVs so none of the light bulb sections are on a crease in the wall, because I don't think anyone's going to notice it aside from me, but my issue with that kind of visually is it looks like a light at an angle, and it really doesn't read well as a unique thing. It makes it look too much like a 3D model, so I like to avoid that when possible. And then I am making another plane to go over the top of this, and this is going to be the grating, which is done with a factory fence material I have, which has this nice little music note, because the factory is music themed. And then for the nimble hat, I'm just using the UV projection to kind of a wavy bit and duplicating this, rotating it below to give an impression of a grate you really can't go through, but one you can still see through. Basically just like a nice little visual for the middle of this area. And then I'm adding a lip to this because, I don't know, I think when models go very cleanly one into the other, it looks too much like a 3D model, so I like to add these kind of like lip visuals to them, where it's kind of like a little visual bump that comes out, and I think it looks a bit more natural, like a real created thing, and opposed to just a 3D model. For this upper section, I'm just extruding out and then flattening it out, and then I'm just going to separate the floor section and then reset these just like very, very simple UV projection to make the floor tiles, because I can do that very easily where I just make one plane match with the one plane. I'm realizing that two of those walls can't possibly be seen, so I'm just deleting them. And now I'm being really lazy. There's a doorway in the other part of the factory this leads into. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it and stick it into this area because it's an identical doorway, and the fact that it is identical aligns with the puzzle, so of how to connect these two. No spoilers, but it needs to be identical, and I'm not just being lazy, but I'm mostly being lazy. And all I'm doing here is I'm shifting some of these little pulses on the side of the doorway to make it so it doesn't clip into the side of the door. Just so it looks nice, really. This is pretty design. And then I'm going to add some more detailing to this wall. I'm just re-unwrapping it because of the extruded parts. It doesn't line up anymore. It was just a stretch UV, so I'm just resetting that. And then I'm doing a loop cut on these sections to have these strips on the top and the bottom of the wall. And I'm trying to make the UVs look nice. And I'm really struggling to because they're so small. But what I'm going to do is I'm wanting to make these the strips, and then I'm going to adjust these so the walls all have these lights on them, which I think is a nice little unifying feature of the Flying Factory, because it all has these nice little lights on the walls. And I'm filling for time because I seem to have paused the video. It's just a nice little design to the wall. I think if the wall is all one material, same with the lips on the ground, I think it looks a bit too 3D model-y, and I want to avoid that as much as possible when doing some of these designs. So I like to make it have these nice little sticky outy bits and a bit more detailing to make it look like it is a real place in opposed to a 3D model. For these part, I'm doing a loop cut in the center of it, and I am erasing the top and the bottom line or edge of these, so it's not just sticking out, it's sticking out at kind of like this nice crease, which again I think makes it look more natural to how a regular thing might stick out of a wall. It's not just going to be a flat cube coming out of a wall, it's going to have this like top and bottom crease to it. Is anyone going to notice this? Maybe not. Maybe it's just me and I'm in hell and I'm here forever. But I always like to do this for these kind of lights, and at this point I'm just deleting the backwards part of these lights because, well, being from a fixed angle, you can't ever see the back of these things. No point having the mesh there. Just remove it. And at this point, kind of just done most of it. It's kind of just done. It's kind of just, this is like the basic, building block of this area, so I can get working on the detail. For this area, I'm wanting to make the actual space the doorway goes into, and for this, I'm basically just pushing it in, and because the doorway has this lip around it, the UVs don't actually have to match with the area outside of it, and I'm realizing that because of the color cone of the doorway, I don't need to do that, so I just delete it completely. But if you wanted to make a doorway, that is how you go about making a doorway. And here I am, being real lazy again, and I'm just taking these tubes that I've made elsewhere in the factory, and I'm just duplicating them. I'm just reusing the model. I made one really nice tube, and I've never made another tube for the factory again. I've just duplicated them for the entire design. The reasoning for this, thematically, is to make it have a visual cohesion, so you know the architect of these tubes was consistent throughout. It's because the tubes look nice, so I don't need to duplicate them. Look, the tubes are fine. There's an animation relating to the tubes. I see no reason to do it again. Just reuse the tubes. It's fine. The idea with these is, again, with the other stuff, where you have the lights, I want some detailing. I don't just want a flat wall. I would like some detailing in these, and the thing I like to do with the tubes is separate parts of the floor and separate parts of the wall with an extrusion, so it has a segment missing and you can see into it, and it has these tubes with music notes flowing through them, which doesn't change the collision of the area whatsoever because it's just flat on the floor and flat on the wall, but it has more detailing to it, and it doesn't just look like a boring tile. It has more stuff to it. And the top one that is in the collision, I really like, because I like putting items on top of these to do puzzles. And they're really easy puzzles because I just put an item on top of a tube. For this one, I'm adding an edge loop right by the end because I'm just going to be rotating these, and it's going to be really scuffed and look bad. So I don't want the whole top section of the tube to look bad. I just want this end section to have as little rotation as possible and kind of adjust for it. But it is a flat color, so realistically I think it having this kind of not being super clean, it's fine. No one's gonna tell. Don't tell anyone. Don't.
I know. I'm gonna tell everyone. Bye.
But it's fine. It's okay. For these ones, I'm just extruding through the walls, and I'm adding little sections for where the pipe can be. So taking the wall section, extruding it out, and I'm realizing with this one I have scuffed it up because I have just done the actual wall itself. And you'll see in a moment I undo this one too. And can you see why I undo this section? Leave it in the comments below. It's because the tube just goes into a very small section of the wall and it looks weird. I don't know, again, maybe it's just me. I was thinking if the tube ends there, it doesn't read very well as the tube traveling somewhere. It just looks like the tube is going into like this very tiny section of the wall. So I moved the tube up, and also with the animation I use for these, when I set it up in Unity, I cannot have it set going to a very small section, and you'll see why later. I felt like it was a bit dull, boring, so I wanted to add this little platform here. I'm going into the first area. I'm kind of seeing how I made a platform there, just to add a bit of visual similarity, but as you'll see, I completely ignore that and do something different in a moment. But I'm adding this platform. I'm making it red because the red tiles make contrast well. It shows it that it is a different platform, it looks nice, and then I'm taking down the top of it and I'm making a fence out of it to go right here. And I'm just doing that by projecting it and then expanding it out to be as wide as I want it for the visual. And I'm realizing I can add a really stupid puzzle here where the fences have a gap at the bottom and you can go underneath it and there's items behind. So I've worked in a puzzle as I've been designing this area, which I think is a lot of Rhell's design. A lot of the puzzles I've made for Rhell have come from, or at least the, side ones where there's just a funny item you have to get. A lot of those have come from designing models for areas where I just feel like, I'm trying to sort of put a back to it here and I'm realizing it looks really ugly and I'm just deleting it and going with the puzzle idea. I'll make an area and then I'll make a thing and I'll think, oh, getting to this one section of this area would be interesting, I should do that. And then I'll make a puzzle about it just from that. Same with the pipes. I look at the pipe and I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to get on top of the pipe. I'll put a thing there. Again, with this one, I am copying and pasting a tile section for this top part, and all this is, same with the other one, is a UV thing, projecting a tileable music note on top of a different mesh. So all I really need to do is select the music note and kind of expand it to the new shape I have made it, and it works perfectly fine. It's just a tileable texture on top of another tileable texture, so it's very, very easy to make, which is a lot of Rhell's materials and a lot of Rhell's modeling stuff. It is just a bunch of tileable textures. At this point, I'm realizing that I've somehow deleted one of the lights. I don't know how that happened. I think I just deleted the middle light strip by accident, so I remake that later. But at this point, I'm doing the surfacing. If you make something in Blender, it will be, by default, flat shading on all the faces of the surface, which I think looks ugly. I think looks terrible. I never like how it looks. So I'm making it all have smooth surfacing and then using an edge surface. I think it's called edge cut. I don't remember. It's the thing where it adds a rough, hard line on certain bends of the mesh if it is above a certain angle. That's it, model done. Now we have the specific stuff that is unique to Rhell. So Rhell, the way the boundaries and color for the areas work, if you haven't been able to tell, is these sort of things where I will make a mesh that goes around the surfacing of an area, and then I will make this one flat color. You thought I was being clever, you thought I was making models in a not stupid way, but I was in fact doing this. It is a unlit surface, so I'm not particularly worried about Z-fighting either, so I just have these meshes completely overlapping each other, and what the purpose of this is if you are zooming out or you're looking behind areas, you won't be able to see stuff. So it's all one flat color, and for example, the pipes and the things that are going to be underneath the factory, they're all going to be hidden behind this surfacing, and it gives the illusion of just kind of a room suspended in a flat area, which I have always really liked with Rhell's design. I like doing that for a lot of the visuals. I like having this sort of like kind of like toy boxy look for a lot of internal areas, and I think it juxtaposes quite well with the exterior areas. If you're wondering what I'm doing here, I'm doing collision hitboxing, so you can skip the section if you just care about the art. Basically, I will make cubes and I will make very simple shapes where collision should be in these areas. So right now I'm kind of blocking out the walls. I just want it to be in the general shape of where the walls are. because Rhell has its own physics system. I can handle a lot of colliders very easily. It doesn't really have an issue with how I made Rhell's physics, because I'm not using Unity's physics system, which sucks. I'm using my own one that I made. Yeah, I'm pretty big brain. I made my own physics system. Basically, I make a bunch of meshes, and I use a mesh collider to make my own unique colliders for all these areas. It's generally how I find is the fastest and easiest way for me to make collision for places. But hey, it's just personal preference, I think. So at this point, I've kind of made the collision for all the areas. I'm realizing that the pipe should have a different collision, because the sound effect that plays when Rhell is standing on the pipe is different than the sound effect she plays when she is standing on metal. So to do that, I have the hitbox have a different tag. So the tag for the metal should be different than the tag for the pipe, so a different sound effect can play when she is stood on either of them. And to do that in the modelling or the hitbox section, all I will do is I'll just make a little cut around where it can be, and there can be some overlap to this because my physics system that I've made allows for overlapping in colliders without, any issues. Rhell will just smoothly walk over both of them, and it's okay. At this point, I'm just doing cleanup. I think at one point I make a collider that overlaps with a doorway, and I realize that you got to walk through a doorway. Can't have that. And this is basically it for making a level. I think having the meshes all be, these loopable textures makes it super, super quick and simple. And I have finished this video of me speed modeling, so I'm going to shut up talking and move on to the actual making this area in Unity. Onto the Unity section, I have all of my scenes kind of in this default section, so it basically just has all of my essentials I would need for a scene and the player and everything else for testing it. I'll import my area, and you can tell, bunch of blocks. So I select everything that I made for a hitbox. I will assign my hitbox to these by adding a mesh collider and just setting up all the tag information for these and the layer information, basically just putting them all on the hitbox layer and the correct tags for whatever the floor should sound like. And then I go about assigning wherever the doorways are supposed to be. These are just like my internal hitboxes for what is a door and where it should lead to. I'll then make the colouring for the actual exit and also copy and paste some visuals from other areas. So all the volcano areas have this, or the factory areas have this volcano beneath them which spews up smoke. So I'm just kind of copying this, keeping it consistent, and I don't need to redraw a new one just for this one area. And I'm just gonna arrange the actual particle system so it kind of cleanly comes up through the mesh we made in the center and makes this nice little like smoke spiral, which is cool if you're looking down on it, and basically just is a nice little bit of set dressing for the area. I'll go about adding the animators for these. So for these musical notes, I have two sets of animators, and these kind of are things I slot into where the pipes are. Because the pipes have back face culling, you can actually see through them and you just see the back of the pipe. So if I place them in the pipe, like these musical notes, you can see them as they move through the pipe, giving the illusion of a pipe with transparency and stuff inside of it, but in actuality it's just you're seeing the back of the pipe, not the front of it. I only have two animators for these. So I have the horizontal one, I have the one that goes with the curve, and these are basically just moving them one unit and then resetting these, so it cleanly looks like they are moving back and forth. I'm just testing these, making sure they move along as I'm, intending them to. They're not clipping through the geometry whenever they move along, and it all looks fine. At this point in placing items down, I have all my items in prefabs of whatever they are supposed to be. If you are placing items or things that need to be consistent among scenes in Unity, I would recommend having them in a prefab, because it just means whenever I make a new thing, I just copy and paste it. Same with these items. I have a prefab for all of my sofas, all of my briefcases, these speakers, because everything in Rhell has to be interactable in a consistent way. All objects are variants of one core prefab that I add variants to, based on the visuals of what the thing is. And that means I can easily edit these and everything is kept consistent across Rhell. So the screws, the sofa, the speakers, they're all basically the same item at their core. And it also means if they're a prefab, I can kind of just drag and drop them into the scene. So I'm just dragging and dropping whatever I feel like will look nice in this scene. I wanted the top area to be the sort of rest area, so I'm just thinking what would work there, and I end up putting a table and some books because I realise in the story the player who goes here, the NPC, is a big nerd, so having a bunch of books really shows that they are a dork and they like to read. So I'm just placing everything together. An interesting thing there is if you have one item on top of the other, they have to be, in the way I set it up, they have to be parented together in the hierarchy system before the game is made, and that's just how the game registers that they are going to be stacked initially. And after I place everything, I do a nice little run around as well, and I see how everything is working, and I really like how everything looks visually. I think it has a nice little draw of the eye to where you're supposed to go, being that doorway. And I think it looks pretty. I think it looks like a nice area. I'm happy with how everything looks. I was thinking the wall sections might look a bit bare, but I think it's fine for how it is. Maybe I'll add some signposting there, but I kind of like it being bare because it draws the eyes to the other stuff. And now I'm testing the collision for this to see if the hitbox here is small enough for the player to go under, and it's not. And instead of changing that in Blender, which I could easily do, I just go into Blender, I would change the mesh, and then I would change the hitbox. I'm instead making that hitbox a box collider instead, and I'm just manually altering it because it does look visually like the player should be able to get underneath, so I don't really need to alter the visuals too much. And just adjusting it slightly allows the player to get underneath that section very easily if she is squished, which is the puzzle solution. That's your spoiler. I'm then adding a prefab for a dialogue item. These are, again with everything else, prefabs of each other, they're just variants of each other. This is a interactable where it will register that the player needs to talk to it. No spoilers for you, but basically I go up to it, I interact with it, it gives me some dialogue for it. I'm testing this works for getting up there as a puzzle. I'm realising that the placement of the screws, if you are to send them completely up, overlaps a little bit with the pipe. Just enough that the screw can get past it, but not so much that the screw will be able to fall through it, so it does end up landing on the pipe, which I don't like, so I'm adjusting these. And I also, when testing it then, realised that the roof was a bit low for if you want to sail something upwards. You bang your head on the roof a bit too easily, so I'm just adjusting the hitbox for the roof so the player can actually go pretty high in this area without having too much issue. And this is kind of different with each area in Rhell. I'll think how I want to have some, like how tall the roof should be compared to everything else, and I kind of don't really keep it very consistent in Rhell. It's just kind of whatever I feel like at the moment. And then my final thing I like to do is have the camera parameters for an area. So this is how far on the X, Y, and Z axis the camera is going to move, different elevations of zoom, and also in different areas. This is unique to each area. So it's basically, if Rhell is to walk to the far right of a room, there isn't a coding thing for, checking the collision of an area. It is all manual wherever the camera is going to go in these sections. So it is something I set up all by myself. And at this point, I'm just walking around the area and I'm just testing everything works, which it all pretty much does. This is a very simple area in terms of the puzzle. It's more complicated in terms of the visuals, which I think is, a pretty good one to show off, but it is an interior area, so I wish I could have shown off an exterior area. But at this point, I'm just walking around, I'm doing some collision stuff, I'm seeing what works, what doesn't, but everything seems fine to me. At this point, it has some nice collision. I think the puzzle for this area, or the thing you are supposed to figure out, is it's a very simple one. Getting to this area is more of the tricky difficulty, but once you're here, the actual puzzle it presents you is not a difficult one. But I won't spoil what it is. You gotta play my game for yourself to get that. And that's how I go about making the area in Rhell. It is definitely one of my favourite things to do in Rhell. I'm a big fan of how everything goes about in terms of modelling, in terms of making the visuals and making the levels. Since that is mostly what I'm doing for Rhell now, since a lot of the actual mechanics of Rhell are all just done, Making levels is definitely one of my favourite things to do. I am an artist at heart, and I just love making a nice little area for Rhell to run around in. This one was definitely very fun. It's something I've wanted to do for Rhell, making a area for Rhell and recording it and going about my process, but I couldn't do that for a while because for the last 2 months I've been making heavily spoiler-filled areas, and if I showed any of it, it would just ruin the game. So making this one self-contained area at this point is great because there's nothing to give away by looking at this area. You've seen the trailer for Rhell, you know that there's factories in Rhell. It's a nice little place. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful for you, the viewer. If you want to make a similar sort of style, I'd recommend it. I think it's very fun. I think it's very beginner friendly to make this sort of style. I think toony things and low poly things very fit themselves well for beginners in making games and in making Blender art in general. And I would say just go for it because it is fun to do, and you should do that. If you would like to play the game and see some of these levels, then you can check it out in the pinned comment below. It is a free demo. It's 1,000,000 hours long and you can play it all you want. So if that seems interesting, check out the pinned comments. There is also a Rhell official Discord. If you are interested in talking about Rhell, then you can join the official Rhell Discord, which will also be in a pinned comment or maybe the description. I don't know how YouTube works. I don't know which of those putting a link in is going to make YouTube kill me for. But that's it for dialogue. Goodbye. Play my game, please.